Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here. First of all, I've been wearing hearing aids since John F. Kennedy was president. Can anybody beat that? No? It's okay. So if you're not hearing, say so, and we'll do something. Okay. Can we turn the lights out, I wonder? It'll sharpen the photos a little bit. Curtis liked to get around from one place to another. A guy who couldn't sit still, it seems. And when he went someplace, he wanted to go fast. Now we're seeing him here at quite a young age, 19 to 21 right here. And the bicycle, such as he's using, was brand new. You've seen the high wheelers. These have just appeared and started taking over. And he's in the uniform of a racing club in Hammondsport. So he was a racer and a champion racer at that. He also used the bike for pleasure and for getting around. And they did a thing in those days called making a century, riding 100 miles in one day. Now, considering how lousy the roads were, that was a real accomplishment. But when I'd have serious bikers come into the Curtis Museum, we have a big photo of this. They'd say, he had a bike like that back in 1898 with toe clips and dropped handlebars? Oh, the answer is yes, obviously. So several things went into Glenn. First of all was training and work and practice. Secondly, you notice how muscular he is there. He was a swimmer as well as being a biker. And thirdly is equipment. And put all three together and you can accomplish quite a lot. Put an engine on your bicycle, and lo and behold, you have a motorcycle. Well, you might do that for experiment, but you got to purpose-build the motorcycles, obviously, to carry the weight and all of that. Again, Glenn raced as a champion, now being known outside the Hammondsport and Keuka Lake area, now being known in New York City and Boston, as far out as Chicago, as the Hell Rider, people called him. He created the first two-cylinder motorcycle. He determined that the best place for the engine was down as low as you could get it, right on the center line. And why is he crouching like that? Well, he's cutting down air resistance. He's also lowering the center of gravity, which makes his maneuvering safer. People didn't think safe when they looked at Glenn Curtis. But the fact was he went out and studied the courses beforehand, and he calculated how far he could bank or lean and how fast he needed to be going at any given point. So it was said that this was almost a patented position of Curtis's. So, of course, constantly making the engines more powerful was also a good idea. Less weight, more output. That's how you win races. And less weight, more power is exactly what you wanted if you wanted to fly back in those days. Still in these days, but really wanted it back in those days. So aeronautical experimenters began coming to Glenn and asking for his engines. And one of his two-cylinder engines, like we just saw, powered the first successful airship or blimp or dirigible in the United States. And then the experimenters started saying, well, you love the motorcycle engines. How about purpose-built aero engines? So he started designing and building those. And then he created was just about the first V8 engine. And he said to the guys in the shop, we started out with motorcycles and put those engines into airships. What would happen if we took one of our airship engines and put that into a motorcycle? Well, everybody agreed it was the worst idea they'd ever heard in their lives. But he took it down to Almont Beach, which is the one right next to Daytona Beach. It's where they did the racing in those days. He was not in a race because there was nothing else like this. It was a class all by itself. But he did an official run, a mile in 26 2/5 seconds. And that's on the beach, not on an oval or a racetrack or a runway or anything like that. That's just on the beach with the sand and the crabs and everything else. So it works out to about 136 miles an hour. Literally no human being since the earth began had gone that fast. So this, of course, helped sell motorcycles and engines. Now this is the only photo that is not from local or Glenn Curtis himself. This is what they call a quadricycle. In the very early days of motorized transportation, there were three candidates to become the prime road vehicle: the motorcycle, the motor car, and the quadricycle. Think of it kind of like a glorified go-kart. It has a one-cylinder engine, and the four wheels, as you see there. Obviously it's very lightweight. Anybody ever been on the road called the Winding Stair? The one that goes up from Hammondsport, pretty steep, pretty. In 1901, Glenn Curtis and J.S. Hubbs drove one of these things from the bottom up to the top. That was quite an accomplishment. Not for the guys so much, just for the engine, for heaven's sake. To get there and accomplish that. It's sort of the beginning of the motor age in Hammondsport. The quad obviously faded from the scene pretty quickly. Henry Ford actually helped that along. He had a quadricycle built and then ostentatiously drove it all over Detroit for a while. So people said, oh, Ford's going into quadricycles. No sense in our starting up the business. So he killed the business before it even got going, which was his goal. Henry wanted things more like this, and of course Glenn liked them too. You want to go fast? Okay. Cars go faster yet. And all through his life, he was buying and building faster and faster cars. He used them just like everybody else would. I never heard of him getting into an auto race or anything like that. But he would open up once he got out on the road. He liked to drive fast. He liked to do everything fast. And I don't know, maybe that was some kind of learning disability or whatever. It might have been only when things were going really fast that they seemed normal to him. That's kind of the way he behaved. Now, having said that, Mrs. Curtis also learned to drive a car, and she liked to drive fast too. Not as fast as Glenn, but fast. And their son Glenn Jr., guess what? He liked to drive fast too. That's Glenn in the blimp there, in the airship. That's his first flight. And we're in Hammondsport. Champlain Beach is off to our right here. These are the flats, the Kingsley Flats. And his friend Thomas Scott Baldwin, the guy who discovered the Curtis engines for dirigibles or airships, moved operations to Hammondsport, moved in with Glenn and Lena, became part of the family, and built his airships or blimps there in Hammondsport with Curtis engines. And Curtis would travel around with him and be the ground crew. These things couldn't actually accomplish anything. The money was in exhibitions back in those days. Well, this day Curtis said, I'd like to try it out. And Captain Baldwin said, take it over. And he did. And he rode it around for a while, came back down, and he said, flying is wonderful. And then he said, I think I can make it go faster. So he became kind of a pioneer of the airship, lighter than air world. And here he is at Fort Myer, Virginia in 1908. That's Glenn in the bow on our right, and Captain Baldwin on the left in the stern. Baldwin was the most experienced airman, certainly lighter than airman in America. The Army wanted an airship, what we would call a blimp. They gave him the contract, and he tossed the engine part of it to Curtis. Then the two of them took it down there to Fort Myer and spent several weeks running through all the tests. The Army had test standards, it's got to meet this, 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 and this, but they didn't have anybody to actually do the test. So the guys who built the thing did the testing. A little unusual, but who else was going to do it? So you can see the rudder in the back and a stabilizer. In the front, you can make out the 4-cylinder engine, and just ahead of Glenn is a gas tank, and then the elevators in front of that, and of course the propeller out here. And when that was finished, America had an Air Force, one blimp in the Signal Corps. So this is actually the first powered aircraft in the whole government, not just the military. So it's the starting point for the Army aviation, but also the U.S. Air Force, the naval aviation, anything the government's doing with flying began here. Sometimes you wanted to test those engines, and it was quite a pain in the neck to fill up the dirigible with hydrogen and then go out and fly for a little while and then land again and make your adjustments. So Glenn figured out a way to test the propellers much more conveniently. And this got to be called the wind wagon. It's a 3-wheeled vehicle with the engine and the propeller on the back, and he would rumble up and down the roads around Hammondsport to find out, which angles on the propeller were the most effective and so forth. He got to be quite a sight in this. One time he was riding along, and an elderly couple in a buggy were coming in the opposite direction, and the horse spooked. Glenn instantly shut down, jumped out, grabbed the horse by the bridle, and brought it back under control. And the man said, "Don't worry about the horse, young fella. The old lady's more scared than he is." They actually sold a few of these as novelty road vehicles. They weren't really convenient for that purpose, but could be fun to ride around in them. I'll take the beginning credit for this. I came in one day to the Curtis Museum, and I said to Jack Farmer, who was one of our key volunteers, "Why don't we build a wind wagon?" Jack said, "That is a hell of an idea. Let's build a wind wagon." So they did. We have exactly 2 photos of it. The other one is almost identical to this. So they had to do a lot of figuring, but they built the thing, and the day they were ready to roll, a reporter from the Democrat and Chronicle just happened to drop by, see if there were any stories. We went out in the parking lot while Jack drove this thing around. All the workshop guys were out there, and the reporter said to me, "Now, is that propeller actually contributing anything?" I said, "That propeller is all there is. That's what runs it. There's nothing else. It's not just there for the show." In the wintertime, A, you might want to test some propellers, and B, you might like to have a little fun out on the ice. Now, Glenn lost his father and his grandfather when he was 4 years old. And we all know small towns can be just great or they can be just awful. He got the advantage of the great aspects of small town. There were men there who taught him how to skate and fish and swim and hunt and so forth. So being out on the ice was nothing unusual for Glenn. And no doubt he had done some ice boating at some time, even if just hopping onto somebody else's ice boat. But this was a new wrinkle. It could test propellers, it could test engines, and lo and behold, it could go fast. Now, by this point, I think people in Hammondsport were kind of used to Glenn. He was odd to have around in some ways. But everybody could see he was accomplishing great things. And he was also a Hammondsporter. He was born there, brought up there. So he's odd. There's other odd people in Hammondsport too, so we can put up with that. Notice his necktie and his high, stiff collar. His coat and his gloves. He's very well dressed for this, isn't he? And then we move on to hang gliders. Alexander Graham Bell had been working for years on the problems of flight. He decided to put together a blue ribbon group, the Aerial Experiment Association. He said, we must have Glenn Curtis. He's the best engine man in the country. Well, Curtis was quite taken aback by this. He didn't expect a letter from Alexander Graham Bell saying, would you please come and work with me for a while? But on the other hand, he was running a busy factory. He had a family, or at least a wife to support. Could he just drop all that and run off to Nova Scotia to fool around with airships? On the third hand, this was Alexander Graham Bell. It'd be like if Albert Einstein called you up and said, can you come over and give me a hand with something? You're going to say, no, I'm busy tonight. Anyway, he agreed to spend half time with Bell for a year, and he was paid for his half time. His wife and some of his key men took over the factory. And one of the things they did is they started out with a hang glider, or several hang gliders. They started design on the airplane. None of them had ever seen an airplane. So it might have been a little easier if they had, but they had to start someplace. And one of the things they figured was they could get in the air. You know how these hang gliders in those days work. You hold on to it like this to run downhill, and you would develop lift, and then you'd yank your feet up and you'd slide downhill, over the hill for a certain distance, and then gravity would take over and you'd be back on the ground again. With this, they could test the configurations of wings and things like that. They are more or less across from where the present Curtis Museum is. So that's kind of neat all by itself. Now you can also see, you can get kind of snowy. The other guys would be running alongside holding the wingtips so that it wouldn't just drop. And of course, once it started to lift, they'd have to let go instantly. And they're just concentrating on the hang glider, not their own balance. So as soon as they let go, down they go. And you can see the results there. And over time, this turned into airplanes. The first one was called the Red Wing because it was all covered with red silk. March 12th, they took it out on the ice of Keuka Lake, and they flew. They pulled straws to see who would be the first pilot. It was Casey Baldwin, one of the Aerial Experiment Association. I don't know whether that means he won or he lost, but he was going to be the first one. And he revved up. Again, everybody held on to the wings till he got the engine going really good. Then he nodded, they let go, he shot down the ice, and then he shot into the air. Flew straight and level for 319 feet and landed safely. Now, 319 feet does not sound like much, but on March 12, 1908, no airplane in the world had ever gone 319 feet on its first trial. And no pilot in the world had ever gone 319 feet on his first attempt. So this was really quite an accomplishment. They tried again on St. Patrick's Day and wrecked it. They said, it's okay, we decided to build a series of 4 airplanes in sequence so we can take everything we've learned from the predecessors and build it into the new one. And the next one was called the White Wing because they were finally out of red silk. And that flew, and it had something new. Notice the wingtips here. This is airplane number 3, the June bug. One of the things that they created is those triangular flaps. And those got to be called ailerons. And with a different construction, they are standard on all airplanes up to and including the space shuttle. So these flaps work in opposite directions. One will go up and one will go down. It changes the amount of lift at each wingtip. So you can do this, or you can do that. Or if you're doing this, you can make it come back like that. So incredibly significant. But then airplane number 3, the June bug, Glenn was the lead designer on this. This was a guy who had gone through 8th grade. We'd never heard of him even taking an ICS correspondence course in mechanics or anything. But he designed this and he flew it. And this is seen in Pleasant Valley near Hammondsport. And he's flying for the Scientific American Trophy. And they had issued a call for contestants. The first person to use a powered heavier-than-air aircraft, take off unassisted, make a 1 kilometer straight flight, no touching the ground, and a safe landing at the end, before official observers would win this trophy. And the Wright brothers had actually met those requirements, but not with observers. They didn't like observers. Well, Glenn said, we'll do this on the 4th of July. Advertise it. Tell everyone who's interested in aviation. We'll get a crowd out to Pleasant Valley, out to Hammondsport, and we'll prove that we can fly. And so he did. And he went through a few missteps and adventures. Had to have 2 tries to get going good. He started out, there's 1,000 people out there at the Pleasant Valley Wine Company. And they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and Glenn wasn't showing up. There were thunderstorms in the area. It's not safe, I don't fly. And people began to get restless. And they began to think, is this some kind of hoax? You know, we've all come here to see a flying man, really? If you stop to think about it, how likely is that? So the winery invited everybody in for an impromptu tasting and a cold collation, and everybody decided they could wait a little while longer. Glenn came out, first trial, shot way up into the air at a steep angle, too steep. Turned out the tail had been assembled at the wrong angle. Got back on the ground, back to the starting point, reassembled the tail, ready to take off for the second attempt. And Curtis looked down the path that had been laid out, and he saw a photographer setting up just short of the 1 kilometer mark. And he wrote to Bell that something snapped in him at that moment. He'd been having a lousy day, and here was this unspeakable shutterbug getting all set up to take a photo of Glenn Curtis, just barely missing his goal. So he said, despite the photographer, I flew straight, I flew over the photographer, I flew over the 1 kilometer mark, and I kept going. The straight distance was 5,200 feet, something like that. He was weaving to avoid vineyards, so we can figure it's a mile flight. They're still using air-cooled engines, so he had to stop at that point. After this, for aircraft number 4, they moved to water-cooled engines, and that the Silver Dart became the first engine to fly in Canada, first airplane to fly in Canada. And Glenn then went into manufacturing. Now you notice that that aircraft is rather different from the one we were just looking at. In fact, you're harking back to the hang glider here. Simplify, simplify, simplify. That was Glenn's idea. For one thing, it makes the product cheaper, so it's easier to sell. The weight is less, so it's easier to get off. The drag is less, so it's easier to get off. And now we've got these big rectangular ailerons between the wingtips there. Now even more maneuverable than we were before. He's winning the Scientific American Trophy for the second year in a row. He had to fly 25 kilometers uninterrupted. So we did it down on Long Island around a triangular course. Flew just short of 25 miles, actually. Yes.
The lady, the second on the left, is she holding something for...
She's holding up cards to tell him what lap he's on.
Okay, thank you.
So we could tell when he had met the 25 kilometer goal. He went to France right after this and set the world airspeed record. Over 49 miles an hour. It was about 90 miles slower than his land speed record was. There's Mrs. Curtis. She deserves a little attention here, in my humble opinion. He took her up for a flight once. She did not learn to fly or anything like that. As far as he was concerned, the flying and the airplane were dangerous propositions. They were worthwhile propositions, but they were also dangerous. So he wasn't going to take his wife up just for the fun of it. They did it one time and left it at that. But you can see something of the structure of the thing. This is not an open cockpit airplane. This is a no cockpit airplane. Yes?
Are those two-cylinder engines tied together into 8? Is that, did you say the original?
The engine's behind him?
Yeah, that's what.
It's a V8.
Yeah, but is it originally the 2 cylinders and just 4 of them stacked up? Is that what that is?
Yeah, there's 4 on this side, 4 on that side, arranged in a V. One engine.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, the V8 engine is made by putting 4 V2 engines together. I mean, in concept anyway. It's purpose-built as a V8. This open airplane thing, in 1916, Ruth Law flew one of these, which was already obsolete at the time, from Chicago to Hornell nonstop in November. Nothing, just sitting out there in the wind in the time it takes to fly from Chicago to Hornell in 1916 in an out-of-date aircraft.
What was her last name? Law?
Law, L-A-W. I had a naval officer call me one night. He said, I've had to do a project on workplace hazards in early aviation. What do you think? We talked about several ideas. We shot them around. And I said, you know, the other thing is that very soon they were all suffering from hearing loss. He said, hearing loss? I didn't even think of that. Notice where the engine is and where her ears are. She's got the radiator between them, true enough, but those engines are loud, believe me. Plus, you got the changes in pressure and humidity as you're going up and down. So all the early pilots became very hard of hearing. We're in Hammondsport now. In the background there, you can, just ahead of the wing, just above Glenn's head, you can see the steeple of the Presbyterian Church. So that's Glenn in the driver's seat. Seated next to him is Lieutenant Theodore G. Ellison, the first Navy pilot. Curtis went out to San Diego in the winter of 1910-11 because he couldn't fly too well in Hammondsport during the winter. So went to San Diego where he could not only work, but he could keep in touch with the Navy. And the idea was to build a seaplane. And Curtis created the first practical seaplane. A French guy had made one that got up and off and back down, but it wasn't really a practical design. Curtis's was. And the Navy was thrilled with that. They also had Curtis contract pilots practicing landing and taking off on makeshift landing strips on the battleships. So they're experimenting already with what will become the aircraft carrier. And they're already using a tail hook and barriers. It's what they used in World War II, it's what they still use now. So that's kind of fascinating. So this is a float plane, it's a single float, first practical seaplane, and the first naval aircraft. That airship we saw, the SC-1, was the first Army-powered aircraft. This is the first Navy-powered aircraft. They actually also bought a land airplane at the same time. When they figured they had used that up, they handed it down to the Marines, who were used to getting hand-me-downs from the Army and the Navy. Anyway, that became the first Marine aircraft. At this stage of the game, they really still can't do anything very practical. You can move a person from one place to the other. And when he flew over West Point on his way from Albany to Buffalo, he was contemplating how easy it would be to bomb the place. But mostly this is still learning how to fly, learning how airplanes work, learning how to make airplanes better. Henry Ford stopped by in Hammondsport one day to take a look at Curtis's newest invention, which was the flying boat. So there were two types of seaplanes. One is an airplane on floats, and the other is a boat with wings, a hulled aircraft. And that offers a lot of advantages over the float plane. They both have advantages and disadvantages. And Henry Ford stopped by to take a look. A few years later, he bought a Curtiss seaplane, a flying boat, as a gift for his personal assistant. That's now in the Curtiss Museum. This would turn into, eventually, 1919, it would turn into an aircraft, a hulled aircraft, with a wingspan longer than a 737 and two wings. And that would be used for the first flight across the Atlantic. You thought Lindbergh did that, right?
Yes.
He had the first flight from New York to Paris. And also the first flight solo, no co-pilot or anything like that. But the Navy sent off 3 of these Navy Curtiss flying boats to start up in Nova Scotia, go to the Azores, and then hop over to Portugal. One of the aircraft landed and had to be destroyed by gunfire. And the other one got to the Azores safely. The third one disappeared. And they figured the aircraft and the whole crew were lost. And suddenly, out of the edge of the harbor, appeared the missing aircraft. The officer who commanded the whole expedition had navigated 270 miles on the surface, running the engines and using the rudder to get what direction they were supposed to be in. Absolutely vindicating the whole idea of the flying boat. A destroyer rushed out signaling, "Do you require assistance?" And Lieutenant Towers messaged back, "Negative, stand aside," and brought it in. One of the 3 then got to Portugal and then on to England, and the Atlantic had been bridged by air. I would say at last, but isn't really at last, because it's like the day before that somebody thought of actually doing it.
What year was it? What year?
Oh, the year of the Atlantic crossing was 1919. Now, haven't seen too many like this, have you? Dr. Langley, who was the head of the Smithsonian, had been working on aircraft experiments at the same time the Wright brothers were. And he launched this from a houseboat on the Potomac River. Now, you may have seen photos of that. Here's the houseboat, here's the aircraft. it flew 0 feet, you know. It shot off with the catapult, but got nowhere, went straight down into the water. And the wreckage was crated up. Years later, 1914, the Smithsonian said to Curtis, see if you can put it back together and find out whether it actually will fly. Well, in the process, Curtis did a fair amount of rebuilding it. Now, it was always said that, no, they didn't make any changes. Well, really, they did. And Tom Crouch from the Smithsonian pointed out, one of the things they did, notice those floats on there? Kind of turning it into a seaplane, land safely in the water. That was not on the original. In fact, the original had no provision at all for landing. I guess you were just supposed to crash. But anyway, this is the only place the Langley ever flew, was in Hammondsport. And it flew numerous times with numerous pilots over a summer, 1914. World War I got everybody's attention after that. And one of the things they wanted to know, the Smithsonian wanted to know, is this tandem wing arrangement. It's 2 wings, but instead of one on top, there's one ahead and one behind. Does that work? Is it any good? Well, as you can see, it works, but it wasn't, it wasn't successful enough to make it worthwhile to go on making more of this type. Ever since men could fly, which is about 10 years at this point, they also said, I wish my car would fly. So, flying car, Curtis created the first one for the auto show down in New York City. And the question, of course, is, well, does it fly? And really, did it fly? Or is it just sort of a concept car for the air show? Well, they took it down to Newport News after the air show, and the reports are that it did a few straightaway hops. So in that sense, yes, it did fly. Was it a real flying car? No. It's hard to make those two technologies. There are flying cars, but this isn't really one of them. It's just the original concept. They did those few straightaway hops. We jumped into World War I. This got shoved off in a corner and never heard from again, which was maybe a sigh of relief for everybody. Curtis always liked hybrids. He was a nut for hybrids. He was kind of like Tom Swift in the stories. The first Tom Swift story is Tom Swift and his motorcycle. Tom was based a fair amount on Glenn Curtis. Tom was a young inventor and motorcycle racer and bicycle racer who had a shop on the shores of Lake Carlopa in upstate New York. So, yeah, there's a little Curtis in there. Curtis lived at various times in Hammondsport, Long Island, Miami, San Diego, and Buffalo. He always lived near water. And one of the things he liked to do on the water, of course, is go fast. So you can see there the standpipes for his V8 engine. And he's not making anything to manufacture at this point. He's just building fast boats so he can have fun out on the lake or on the river. Back to that darn thing with the propellers again. First the wind wagon, then the ice sled, and now an airboat for the shallow waters down in Florida. This is the Miss Miami, and you can see, I believe that's a 12-cylinder engine there, a Liberty engine left over from World War I. Reportedly, this set a speed record, world speed record, but and I accept that, I believe it, but it was not officially observed or anything like that. but very shallow draft and a propeller, and you're off. Have fun out in the marshes. After World War I, Curtis, well, first of all, Curtis cashed in during World War I, which was a very smart move. When he was getting married, Lena's mother started to get very fretful. You know, Glenn he's only 19, she's only 17, he's a nice boy, but, you know, does he have any prospects? In 1959, he cashed out for $6 million in cash and stock. $6 million went a long way in 1915. So Mrs. Curtis's mother was pretty satisfied, I believe, at that point. Anyway, he backed away from aviation, remained on the board of the company, was no longer really active in it. Airplanes had completely changed by this point. If he wanted to continue flying, he would have had to learn all over again. And on top of that, he had not liked running a big company. He did it successfully, but he liked to lead from the shop floor. And the business was just too big. So he stayed with the company, stayed on the board, stayed part of its development committee, looking at new ideas. But he wasn't involved much like he had been before. He did try out a new thing, the flying boat glider. Perfect for those shallow waters around Miami, in Glenn's opinion. Most people did not like as much adrenaline with their hobbies as Glenn did. So yeah, this is a working item, but no sales. Right after World War I, Glenn and his half-brother decided to create something new, a pop-out trailer for the new motoring world. And that even fit right around here. After World War I, we had to create new business opportunities because the Curtis plant in Hammondsport closed and all the wineries and the vineyards closed for Prohibition. So one of the things was get people down here, not coming on the train and going to the resort, but coming in their cars by family. The fully independent traveler, we call them today. And you can bring your kitchen and your house along with you. So it was a pop-out. Did okay, but not a big success. But a few years later, Glenn took the idea and went further. So back to Tom Swift's hybrids. There's a book, Tom Swift and His House on Wheels. It's pretty much what you've got here. There's one of these at the Curtis Museum. It has a sink, it has a chemical toilet, it has a built-in radio, it has Pullman bunks. So it's designed to be your house that you take around with you as you're traveling around. I saw a report to the Society of Automotive Engineers which claimed that the tow car, it was so aerodynamic that the tow car could go faster with the trailer than it could without the trailer. Now that was an official report to the SAE, but I will say I have my doubts. Definitely aerodynamic and promoted that way. Glenn Curtis knows how to build aerodynamic. Glenn Curtis knows how to go fast. And this was a success. And they were built up to the time of Pearl Harbor. Interestingly, even during the Depression, in a country this size, there were still a lot of people who had money. And FDR said, I see 1/3 of the nation ill-fed, ill-clad, ill-housed. That meant 2/3 who were doing all right. Didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, but today I have a job. And there were people who still had nice amounts of money as well. Oh, that's the home that they built in Miami Springs behind them in the adobe style. Only one of Curtis's homes that is still standing. He designed cars, and he had cars rebuilt, again, with the idea of more speed and a more comfortable ride. In 1910, he had flown 150 miles from Albany to New York City, won the scientific American trophy for the third time, and they retired it to him. And won a $10,000 prize, which was nice too. He immediately handed the check to Mrs. Curtis, who in my opinion had earned it by this time. Anyhow, 1930, he went back to Albany 20 years later to reprise that flight, this time in a twin-engined, closed-cabin, 18-passenger Curtiss Condor airliner. Now, he had never flown anything remotely like this. Professional pilot took off, Glenn flew it en route, and the professional pilot landed. But as you can see, he's quite pleased, right? You don't see a lot of pictures of Curtiss smiling, but he sure is there. And 2 months later, he was dead. Aged 52 years, 2 months, and 2 days. Died of complications following an appendectomy in the Buffalo General Hospital. And 2 days later, they brought him home to Hammondsport, buried him in Pleasant Valley. 3 future admirals were pallbearers. 10 airplanes flew overhead and dropped flowers on the crowd. So the far too short but extremely busy and incredibly productive life of Glenn Curtiss, as seen by all those vehicles that he used to go faster, faster, faster. And, some people could wonder about Curtiss in some ways. I know a person in Hammondsport who said, well, when I first moved to Hammondsport, so I was talking to a lady, I said to her, well, you're of an age, you knew him. What was he like? She said, he was a kook. And he probably was in a lot of ways. He was not an ordinary person. Yes, he was an ordinary Hammondsporter, just like all the other Hammondsporters. But he was also rather different from all the other Hammondsporters, and pretty much from all the other everybody else as well. So a very interesting person, an important person. And a giving person who amassed a lot of wealth and used a lot of it to help people as well. So anyway, that's the far too short Glenn Curtiss story, but jam-packed Glenn Curtiss story. So anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah.
I got an addition, if you don't mind. Art Wilder told me that the most frustrating thing about rebuilding these planes, like the June one, was the fact that Curtiss didn't make any drawings. He just whitewashed the wall, drew the drawings on the wall, and then the next airplane came up, he whitewashed the wall and did another drawing. So they have no drawings to refer to.
Yeah, that's a little exaggerated, but only a little.
Okay.
There are plans, but a lot of it was still being done that way. So no two were exactly alike, because they would fiddle as they went along, say, okay, this works better. So they do that, and there wouldn't be any paper trail. So when Art and the other guys were recopying some of the Curtiss aircraft, they'd always be excited when somebody brought in a photo of a wreck, because that would show them inside. And otherwise, you just had photos of the outside. It would show photos of the inside, and also you'd see, by seeing how things came apart, you could figure out how they went together in the first place.
I have a question.
Yes,
Where is he buried?
in Pleasant Valley Cemetery outside Hammondsport.
Pleasant Valley Cemetery. Where's that?
If you're driving to Hammondsport on Route 54, come out of Bath, go down the hill after the hospital,
Yeah.
and you're on the flat now, and the cemetery is off to the left. It's a very large cemetery. Goes back to the 1700s. Yes.
I've always wondered about the Curtiss Wright Corporation. First of all, how did they
Okay.
get together?
Yeah.
Plus,
Curtiss Wright Corporation. Wilbur died of typhoid fever in 1915. By that point, Orville was no longer making sense concerning Glenn Curtiss. when Wilbur died of typhoid fever, Orville blamed Glenn Curtis. Also, the Wright brothers did not want to make any changes in their airplane because their idea was licensing. So if you use somebody else's invention as part of your airplane, you were creating a licensing problem for yourself. And the problem with that was the airplanes were becoming outdated. It was as if you were taking the high-wheeled bicycle and trying to improve it while everybody else is on a regular bicycle. You could make improvements, but they weren't big enough to actually accomplish anything. So finally, Orville sold out, dropped out, and the two companies were merged together in 1930, along with a host of other companies that were swept in at the same time. Curtiss-Wright Corporation is still active in aeronautics today. As they say, we have the oldest names in aviation. And Glenn was part of that decision-making to create Curtiss-Wright. Yes?
Why does the Smithsonian tend to discount Curtiss?
I'm not sure that it does. Some think so. And there may have been some tendency at one point when he flew that Langley thing over the lake to see if it would work. The Smithsonian, which was run by people who still dearly loved the man who had designed it in the first place, who had passed away, they put a label on it that said, this was the first aircraft capable of flight. Not saying it was the first aircraft to fly, just it was capable of flying. Well, that incensed the Wright brothers quite reasonably. So much so that Orville sent the first airplane to the British Museum. And the Smithsonian had to do a lot of begging and cringing to get it back. And that included some things that Orville wanted stated in the, on the labels concerning their relationship with Glenn Curtiss. So a lot of that never really happened, but they were kind of tiptoeing around him for a while. What did the Wright brothers do? Heck, they invented the airplane. They created flying. Glenn Curtiss was definitely second. Who landed on the moon after Neil and Buzz? Anybody know? Who brought the next ship over here after Columbus? I don't know the answers to those questions. So the Wright brothers created the airplane. Glenn Curtiss created a practical airplane, and in a lot of ways created the airplane business.
What year was the quadricycle?
The quadricycle?
Yeah.
You're talking about the first,
Yes.
say 1900 and 1910, in that period.
Okay, thank you.
Single engine, a single cylinder engine.
Yep, I'm sorry.
Might have been fun to have one, but it didn't really, it was outcompeted by both the motorcycle and the motor car. Yes.
Did the Wright brothers have a lawsuit against Glenn Curtiss?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, geez.
Absolutely. More than one. And to simplify it a little bit, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an aeronautical engineer either, but the Wright brothers had a wing. Inside it has a lot of mechanisms, so you can tilt bend one corner up and the opposite corner down. So you're adjusting what they call the roll on the airplane. The Curtiss airplanes had these separate panels that operated similar concept, taking advantage of the same natural forces. So the Wrights said, our patent covers any manipulation of the surface of the wing to achieve roll. Curtiss and his lawyers said, it ain't on the wing. It's between the wings. It's just not on the wing. That's all there is to it. Not part of the wing. Couldn't be part of the wing, the way it's constructed. Eventually, the judge ruled against Curtiss. He had also ruled against Henry Ford years earlier in a suit when Ford was trying to break a patent monopoly for the automobile. The judge had no training in aeronautics or industry or law. And some people said he just took the easiest answer each time. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know that. But Curtis's lawyers were able to appeal. And one of the things they said was, okay, the ruling says you can't do simultaneous actions of the ailerons. So make them non-simultaneous. You have to do 2 steps now to operate them instead of 1. It's a whole new situation. You don't like that? Sue me. Back at the beginning, and take years to get to that point. During World War I, the government bought all the aviation patents from everybody so they could let out contracts to anybody to build more. So the whole Wright-Curtis legal history is kind of an adventure of its own. We should have lawyers dressed up like Indiana Jones going out to track these things down. Yes, one more.
When was the first airplane used in war?
The first airplane to do what?
To be used in war, World War I?
Ah, okay. The Italians used airplane to bomb rebels in Libya before World War I. And several pilots were hired by several sides to bring their airplanes down to Mexico during a multi-sided civil war there and fly for one or the other. So they dropped bombs and they did observations.
How successful was it dropping?
Yeah, they didn't hurt anybody very much. Scared the dickens out of everybody. But pretty soon you could see they can't really tell where their bomb is going, can they? One of our Navy flying boats was flying over Veracruz in Mexico, one of the multiple times we were invading Mexico because they annoyed us. So we took over Veracruz, and they were flying patrols around, and they took rifle fire, and there were bullet holes through the fabric. So that was the first combat flight in U.S. history. Nobody got hit.
What year did he die?
That's before World War I.
What year did he die?
Oh, what year did he die? I'm sorry, 1930. 52 years old, like I said. Amazing. Imagine if he'd lived just another 10 years, let alone another 20 years, what he might have accomplished.
Kirk, you did say the Wright brothers were first.
First to fly, yes.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. And that wonderful photo there, there's actually a photo of the first flight. And you can see Orville lying down in the aircraft, going along level. But what impresses me is not Orville, it's Wilbur. They were taking turns on the flight. He had made a flight attempt earlier that morning. And he'd been running along, again, holding the, helping hold the wingtips level. And what you see there is the very first person in the world to watch a loved one fly away on an airplane. And hope he's going to be all right. Very first flight. Not just the pilot, but the man left on the ground was there.
And how long was that? Of how many feet? It was
Oh, that was 100 yards, something like that. Not that far. Not as far as 100 yards.
Yeah.
But it was controlled. It was heavier than air. They used a catapult to help them get off. And eventually they built airplanes that did not need catapults anymore. But it met all the requirements, heavier than air, under control, noticeably flies, not just kind of bumping along from the catapult, but actually flies with its own aerodynamics. Okay, if anybody else has any questions or whatever, I'll be happy to talk to you. But I'm not going to make you sit any longer. Thank you.